Costumed vigilantes fight crime in America throughout the 1930s and 1940s and become quite popular. In order to finish what the law couldn't, they create an organization named the Minutemen, and their inaugural lineup is highly valiant, aiding in the capture of criminals and the victory of World War II. But over time, the heroes start to lose their morals or their sense of reason. They frequently die brutal deaths in battle, make the decision to terminate their own lives, are convicted for breaching the law themselves, are assassinated by activists, or are even sent to an institution. The heroes also have a big impact on history. For example, President Kennedy becomes the first person to walk on the moon because to a friendship with Dr. Manhattan, but later, the comedian kills him. A new generation of heroes, known as the Watchmen, take over as all of the Minutemen's heroes encounter difficulties. Aside from the comedian and Manhattan, other characters include Rorschach, Adrian as Ozymandias, Laurie as the new Silk Spectre, and Adrian as Ozymandias. Unfortunately, the first generation's damage is too extensive, and by the time Nixon begins his third term, a law banning vigilantes has been passed and the public despises superheroes. Now in 1985, the comedian is by himself in his flat watching a television program on a possible nuclear conflict with the Soviet Union. Unsurprised, the comedian throws something at the intruder before grabbing his revolver as a tall, thin man bursts into the room. The stranger, though, soon disarms him, and the two engage in combat. The furnishings and even one of the walls are broken as they exchange a few strikes. The comedian tries to defend himself with his kitchen knives, but the stranger rapidly obtains the upper hand and flings him out of the high-rise window. A smiling face button soon appears on the ground close to his body when he is killed by the fall to the ground. Rorschach enters the flat later, after the police have finished gathering evidence and have left. After looking around, he finds the comedian's costume and his weapons in a hidden compartment in the closet. Additionally, he discovers the button with the bloodstain on it. He records every aspect of his inquiry in his journal. Daniel is currently at Hollis, the original Night Owl's house. The two meet frequently and catch up on old times. Tonight, they talk about the comedian's passing and Rorschach's vigilante actions. Nixon's regulations forbid masked vigilantes, but Rorschach hasn't been deterred thus far. Daniel finds the door to his house shattered when he gets there, so he slowly opens it to find Rorschach in the kitchen. Daniel brings Rorschach to his private Night Owl lab when he shows him the smiley face button. Daniel argues that the Watchmen are over and that Rorschach may disregard this since no one knows his true identity. Rorschach speculates that someone is killing the superheroes. The following day, Daniel goes to see Adrian, who is now conducting an interview. He discusses the creation of renewable energy sources and claims that if he could eradicate the worry of running out, war would become obsolete. Additionally, he makes the assumption that Manhattan might be able to prevent some of the impending nuclear attack but not all of it. Daniel tries to tell Adrian that someone could be pursuing the Watchmen after the interview, but Adrian seems unconcerned. Rorschach breaks into the U.S. Army Rockefeller Military Research Center in the nighttime using various cunning methods, including a breach in the fence and hopping onto roofs, to speak with Manhattan and Laurie, who cohabitate. Manhattan must adjust his own size in order to speak to his old friend since he is caught in the middle of an experiment. He claims that although he usually has the ability to predict the future, he is currently unable to do so owing to tachyons traveling across time that may have been the consequence of a nuclear holocaust. When Rorschach's murder warnings become too intrusive, Manhattan uses his abilities to transfer Rorschach out of the conversation in the middle of it. Manhattan subsequently informs Laurie that he has been collaborating with Adrian to find a solution to the energy dilemma in an effort to stop the war. Then, after watching her parents argue, he reads her thoughts and tells her that while he knows she wanted to eat with him, she will now be going out to dinner with Daniel because he can't. Daniel is visibly captivated as Laurie enters the restaurant. As they reminisce about the past, Laurie confides that Manhattan is becoming further away. The following day, Laurie is teleported to her mother's house, where she promptly pukes in the toilet. Sally is having margaritas in the afternoon and thinking back to her time as the original Silk Spectre. She even shows Laurie an adult cartoon about her time as the Minuteman. Laurie, however, is horrified by her mother's actions, which causes Sally to experience a flashback. The trio had posed for a photograph back in the Minutemen's heyday. After that, the comedian followed Sally as she exited her costume in the billiards area. When he persisted in trying to be flirtatious with her despite her objections, Sally was forced to punch him. The comedian instantly kicked and hit her in the back before pushing her onto the table and attempting to use her as a bargaining chip. Fortunately, another superhero discovered them and stopped the comedian by immediately beating him up. The comedian is given a funeral with military rites in the meanwhile in a cemetery. Manhattan recalls that he and the comedian engaged in combat with the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army during the Vietnam War. The comedian relished using a fire thrower to burn his victims to the ground while he utilized his abilities to grow enormous and cause everyone to explode. A Vietnamese woman approached the comedian after the war was finished and said she was carrying his child. She cut the inebriated comedian in the face with a broken bottle, leaving a scar that will never go away, after he insulted her and refused to accept responsibility. The comedian shot the woman there, and then out of rage. The comedian asserted that Manhattan's inaction demonstrated that he didn't genuinely care about people when Manhattan exhibited shock. Adrian observes the funeral procession while also recalling a watchman meeting. Adrian wanted to assist others, whereas the comedian had a cynical, misanthropic outlook. The comedian destroyed Adrian's exhibit, claiming that the fear of nuclear war outweighed all of the watchman's efforts. Daniel also remembers a previous incident in which he and the comedian attempted to control an anti-vigilante riot. Daniel had attempted to approach the situation diplomatically, but the comedian charged into the fray and engaged in combat with the demonstrators, punching, shooting, and using tear gas on them until they were all gone. Daniel, clearly disturbed by the level of lawlessness plaguing the country, asked the comedian what had become of the American dream. The comedian replied that they were looking into it. The smiling face button is then buried by Daniel. Moloch, a former adversary, too pays his respects before departing the cemetery without spotting the guy holding a placard outside. A message that reads, "Behind you," is inside the refrigerator when he gets home. Then Rorschach abruptly attacks Moloch, inflicting pain on him in order to get him to reveal why he attended the burial. Moloch claims that the comedian broke into his home a week earlier while extremely inebriated, after which he sobbed and babbled about a list. Later, Laurie discovers Manhattan has duplicated himself when they are sharing a private moment. She is first put off by having a sexual relationship with two individuals at once, but she soon comes to understand that a third Manhattan is also working on the energy machine. She tosses something at him in frustration since she doesn't have his entire focus, but it just passes through his skull. After Laurie has left, Manhattan teleports Adrian and Karnak to observe the device as it arrives on a screen. In response to Laurie's claim that she had nowhere else to go, Daniel offers her to accompany him on a trip to see Hollis. Daniel and Laurie see a strange on the streets with an odd sign as they make their way to Hollis. A sizable band of street thugs surrounds them as they enter an alley. The resulting conflict is exceedingly one-sided even if they don't have their outfits, and yet retain their talents. When a thug tries to shoot them, Laurie uses another man as a shield while the other man uses the attacker's knives to stab and shatter their bones. Daniel and Laurie prevail in the battle in a couple of minutes. Manhattan, meantime, dresses up using his supernatural abilities before traveling to a television studio. He is charged for giving many of his former coworkers cancer in front of the camera. His ex-girlfriend Janie shows up and admits that she is also sick, removing her wig to demonstrate this. This news has everyone in the studio in a frenzy, and Manhattan is surrounded by inquiries and lights. He cries, "Leave me alone!" out of exhaustion and teleports out of the studio. Afterward, Manhattan emerges on Mars, where he starts reflecting on significant occasions in his history, like putting together a watch with his father, how he met Laurie and had a beautiful connection with her, his father's passing from cancer, and the moment he ceased to be a human. He unintentionally became stuck in the chamber of an intrinsic field generator while doing an experiment. The gadget immediately fired rays that gradually dissolved him layer by layer since the other scientists were unable to remove him. The next days brought strange ghosts composed entirely of skeletons or nervous systems, and one afternoon the mess hall began to tremble as Manhattan came back to life as a blue humanoid. When he was informed he required a logo, he drew a circle on his forehead with a dot in the center after seeing him covered in TV news coverage. President Nixon used him to help finish the Vietnam War once he demonstrated his new abilities, but over time, he evolved into the president's go-to tool for the dirtiest of jobs. He fell in love with Laurie after he joined the Watchmen, and Janie broke up with him as a result of his adultery. Now that Manhattan is sick of people, he starts utilizing his abilities to construct a gigantic structure on Mars. While doing so, Nixon and the War Cabinet discuss current developments involving the Soviet Union. Nixon says Manhattan has 2 days to fix the issues, but he also appears willing to lose the East Coast in a nuclear assault. The following day, Adrian hosts an unpleasant meeting with all of the industrial executives. Before expelling them, he reminds them of his genius and his desire to bring the world together. The elevator door opens as one of the men makes an attempt to apologize, and a delivery man immediately begins firing. The secretary and many businessmen are shot and killed right there, but Adrian manages to dodge the gunfire and use a hammer to take the gunman down. He attempts to question him, but the man takes a poison pill and passes away. Laurie and Daniel talk about the attack over lunch. Laurie accepts to Daniel's suggestion that she move in with him for protection after he claims that it is unsafe for the former heroes. Rorschach's voice can be heard telling them that he is watching them leave the restaurant, but he is not wearing his disguise. Later, Rorschach examines the ID of the assassination attempt on Adrian. Rorschach recalls seeing a letter from the man's employer, Pyramid Transnational, at Moloch's earlier. When he goes back to Moloch's flat, he finds that Moloch has just passed away since his cigarette is still blazing. When the police realized Rorschach was inside, they surrounded the building and charged him with murder. Rorschach emerges and starts torching the officers with a torch he created out of a spray can as they approach the door to the upper floor. He leaps out the window and proceeds to fight the police on the street after exchanging a few blows with them. Since there are too many of them, Rorschach is eventually apprehended and revealed. His true identity quickly becomes public knowledge, exposing that he was the bonkers man holding the sign. Moloch's murderer, Rorschach, is currently in prison. According to the jail psychologist, if he cooperates during the psychological assessment, he will be sent to a hospital rather than prison, where many inmates are out for retribution. Rorschach remembers significant events in his life as he studies ink blots. He witnessed his mother kissing an unknown man at a young age, and she smacked him and told him she should have had an abortion. Rorschach would pounce on older kids who teased him and beat them up, biting them as well. The psychologist wants the truth from Rorschach since the guy is having violent thoughts while providing him with absurd responses like clouds. When he was still a rookie vigilante, Rorschach investigated several leads regarding a kidnapped little girl. When he located the abuser's home, he saw that the girl's garments had been torched and eaten by dogs. When the criminal arrived, he saw his dogs dead, and Rorschach leapt on him, chained him to a chair, and then repeatedly struck him in the head with the criminal's own weapons. He admits to the doctor that his civilian identity perished that day and that all that is left is Rorschach. Rorschach ultimately receives a standard prison sentence. A fellow prisoner teases him in the mess hall, and he answers by punching him and drenching him with boiling grease from a deep fryer. When he goes back to his cell, Big Figure, a criminal he had apprehended 15 years before and who now vows to avenge him later, finds Rorschach. Laurie discovers Daniel's old flying machine while poking around Daniel's building's basement. She erroneously sparks a fire in the lab when she guesses how to activate the rocket engines. Fortunately, Daniel descends, and the two of them put out the fire. The night vision goggles are then put on by Laurie, who asserts that this must be how Manhattan perceives the world. Laurie soon follows Daniel and informs him that while Manhattan saw many things, he didn't see her. Daniel then leaves the room looking unhappy. Then they begin to work on the couch while a broadcast reports the assembling of Soviet tanks in the distance. Daniel has a bizarre dream that night in which Laurie and he are both exposed on a field beneath the sky. She takes off their skin, revealing their superhero outfits, and vaporizes them as a nuclear explosion occurs. Laurie discovers Daniel looking at his night owl gear as he abruptly awakens. The two decide to dress up and head out for some fun in their costumes. When they hear about a burning building via police bulletins as they fly over the city, they rush to save everyone inside. To put out the roof fires, Daniel first fires at the water tank. Then, he lowers Laurie into the blazing structure. Just as the chamber explodes behind them, Laurie leads everyone out and into the flying vehicle. Daniel sets the flyer on autopilot after dropping off the passengers, and the two superheroes start acting flirtatious once more. When they're finished, they make the decision to try to save Rorschach. Back in the jail, there is a riot going on as inmates are killing each other everywhere. Rorschach resists a grab attempt by one of Big Figure's goons through the door by tying the man's hands to the bars. After cutting off his friend's arms with a grinder and breaking open Rorschach's cell bars, another henchman enters the scene. The thug is electrocuted when Rorschach rapidly throws him into the cell toilet, and his grinder's wires come into contact with the water. Big Figure, who is now afraid, flees to the restroom to hide. Daniel and Laurie come and start using punches and kicks to quickly subdue scores of convicts while Rorschach runs to the psychiatrist's office to get his mask. A policeman tries to arrest them, but Laurie takes care of it right away. When they finally locate Rorschach, he murders Big Figure in the restroom before they can leave. They discover Manhattan there when they get back to Daniel's hideout. When Manhattan teleports Laurie to Mars with him, Laurie nearly dies from a lack of oxygen, but Manhattan gives her an oxygen bubble before demonstrating his invention, which sends them on a trip while they debate if mankind is worth preserving. Rorschach hurts a man until he divulges information while Daniel and Rorschach are out with another man in a pub. The heroes decide to chase the money after learning that Janie worked for Pyramid and hired Adrian's killer. They discover that Pyramid is owned by Adrian's firm shortly after breaking into Adrian's office. There are also a lot of enigmatic files in Manhattan. Nixon instructs DEF CON 1 to dispatch the bombers in the meantime. A gathering of scientists toasts to Manhattan's energy reactor, which is now operational, at Adrian's outpost in Antarctica. All of a sudden, everyone starts to feel sick, and it is discovered that Adrian poisoned their beverages. Adrian turns around, and the machine turns on, destroying every body. In New York, Rorschach writes down his concerns in a diary that he leaves in a newspaper's dorm mail slot. Laurie begs Manhattan to bring her back to Earth so she may die among her loved ones, claiming she is not terrified, while still on Mars. Manhattan responds that life is overrated. Manhattan utilizes his abilities to force her to confront the parts of her past that she doesn't want to recall in order to disprove her claims. The comedian is revealed to be Laurie's father, which explains why Sally always kept her away from him and why her parents were often at odds. Laurie is saddened by this and shatters Manhattan's machine in a fit of rage. In order to cheer her up, he acknowledges his error while shielding her from the falling debris with an energy shield. He reveals that Laurie was born from Sally and the comedian's union beyond all odds. Manhattan had never believed in miracles before, but this should be regarded one. They are then shown to be standing on the planet's surface within a massive smiling face. Rorschach and Daniel take out towards Antarctica, where Daniel's aircraft crashes due to the icy winds. Adrian and his mutant cat observe the pair from his security cameras as they start their snowy hike. Rorschach and Daniel eventually succeed in entering undetected, but Adrian is aware of their presence and easily avoids their strikes. A brawl breaks out, but Adrian quickly defeats both of his pals with just a few blows. Adrian then comes clean and accuses Rorschach and the device obstructing Manhattan's future visions of being responsible for all the deaths. To avoid suspicion, he had attempted to kill himself. His goal is to unite the US and the USSR in order to avert nuclear war by a major global catastrophe. The world will believe that Manhattan is behind everything and will rally against Adrian, preventing the imminent nuclear war, if Adrian uses devices bearing Manhattan's signature to destroy a number of major cities. The second time around, Rorschach and Daniel try to stop him, but Adrian always overwhelms them with a few blows and pushes them away. In the end, he admits that he had begun the devastation 35 minutes earlier, and that a battle was pointless. They watch the machine start up on TV monitors as all the major cities start to get decimated one by enormous energy balls. Meanwhile, Nixon's War Council informs him that Dr. Manhattan, not the Soviets, is responsible for the energy signatures. At that point, New York, which is reduced to little more than a crater, is reached by Laurie and Manhattan. As soon as Manhattan realizes that Adrian was intended to appear guilty, they teleport to Antarctica to face Adrian. Manhattan tries to find Adrian by making his way along the hallway, but the mutant cat stops him. Adrian takes use of this opportunity to turn on the machine, destroy Manhattan, and kill his pet all at once. Out of rage, Laurie draws a revolver and kills the man. Adrian pretends to tumble down the steps, but his hand really caught the bullet. The ceiling is shattered as Manhattan emerges as a huge person outside, but Adrian escapes his fist barely in time. After Manhattan teleports back inside, Adrian changes the screens to a Nixon broadcast where he accuses Manhattan of causing the destruction. Manhattan understands Adrian's plan makes sense, and that exposing the plot will only disrupt the peace once Nixon declares that the US and Soviet Union had formed an alliance. But Rorschach is determined to reveal the truth, so he furiously turns to leave. Rorschach removes his mask and commands Manhattan to murder him as Manhattan tries to approach him. Finally giving in, Manhattan uses his powers to cause him to explode, leaving just a bloodstain on the snow. Manhattan then gives Laurie one last kiss before leaving for a galaxy that is a bit less difficult. Adrian is attacked by a saddened and incensed Daniel as he returns to the building, accusing him of having damaged mankind. Adrian endures the punches without showing any emotion. Daniel and Lori take off after deciding it wasn't worth it. Later, Lori and Sally become together. When she reveals to her mother that she is aware that the comedian is her father, they come to terms. When Daniel shows there, he emphasizes that his machine is prepared for more experiences. Rorschach's notebook, which the reporter discovers while searching for a good story, may disclose the whole details of Adrian's scheme.